Evelyn Hart had spent her entire adult life in uniform, a warrior forged in fire, a legend whispered about in special operations briefings, and the first black woman to ever qualify as a Navy SEAL sniper. But on a bitter winter morning in Washington, D.C., she wasn't walking across a stage to accept the Medal of Honor. She was being led in shackles up the courthouse steps, flanked by federal marshals and drowning in a sea of flashbulbs. News anchors called her a traitor. Commentators debated whether her actions amounted to espionage. Protesters screamed for justice. Counter-protesters demanded punishment. But through it all, Evelyn's face remained unreadable. Her hands might have been bound, but her spine was straight. Her gaze didn't waver. What no one knew, not yet, was that she had been silenced to hide something far darker than disobedience. And the people who orchestrated it all had underestimated just how far she would go to protect the truth. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Just 18 hours earlier, Evelyn had been in full-dress blues, medals glinting against her chest, standing in the east wing of the Pentagon. A Marine band had been tuning up. Family, fellow SEALs, and dignitaries gathered to witness history. The president was en route. The press called it a moment of long-overdue recognition, the military's quiet acknowledgement of a woman who had shattered every expectation in one of the most male-dominated units in the armed forces. But as Evelyn stood behind the curtain, waiting for her name to be called, a pair of suited men stepped forward. No words, just a nod. Then the handcuffs. The room went dead silent. No explanation was given. Her commanding officer, Admiral Charles Dunham, wasn't even present. She was escorted out a side exit, past stunned security officers and bewildered colleagues, then placed in the back of an unmarked black SUV. The headlines that followed came fast and furious. Decorated SEAL arrested on treason charges. Pentagon in crisis. Medal of Honor ceremony canceled amid security breach. The next morning, as the courthouse loomed ahead, Evelyn remained calm, but not because she believed the system would protect her. It wouldn't. She knew that now. Her wrists ached from the cuffs, but it was nothing compared to the weight she carried inside. The lives she'd saved, the files she'd secured, the truth she'd refused to bury. And now, the very government she'd risked everything to serve had turned on her. As she stepped out of the transport van, a gust of icy wind whipped through the crowd. Reporters shouted questions. Is it true you leaked classified documents? Are you cooperating with foreign governments? Do you regret your decision, Commander? Evelyn didn't flinch. She kept walking, boots crunching on the stone steps, her orange jumpsuit in stark contrast to the military bearing she still carried. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her silence was louder than any answer. Inside the marble halls of the courthouse, the drama reached a boiling point. The prosecution was poised to make an example of her. Her court-appointed lawyer, a young man who looked barely old enough to shave, had only received her file 3 hours prior. No family had been allowed in the gallery. No Navy representatives had come to support her. It was as if the Pentagon wanted her erased. But Evelyn Hart was not someone you erased. Unbeknownst to the prosecution, there were others watching. In the back row sat Agent Marla Jennings of the DOJ, a seasoned investigator with a gut feeling that something was deeply wrong. Near her, 2 former SEALs, Jason Monroe and Alex Reyes, had flown in under the radar, suspicious of how fast and quiet the arrest had been. And far away, in a windowless room, Admiral Dunham reviewed the same footage Evelyn had once shown him. A grim archive of civilians held captive in an Afghan outpost. used in illegal bioexperiments under a black-budget operation called Project Specter. As Judge Lillian Myers called the court to order, the air in the room grew heavy. Evelyn stood, chains rattling softly, her expression unchanged. Her eyes scanned the room, calculating, focused, unshaken. Because deep down, she knew one truth. She hadn't failed her oath. She had fulfilled it. And now, the people who had orchestrated this betrayal were about to learn what happened when you tried to bury a soldier who had nothing left to lose. And someone, somewhere, was already preparing to blow the lid off everything. The real battle, the one for the soul of the nation, was about to begin. The courtroom was older than it looked. The grand marble pillars, the vaulted ceiling with its faded frescoes of liberty and justice. Everything echoed a time when the law was seen as sacred. But on that frigid January morning, even the building seemed unsure of itself. The heavy oak doors creaked like bones. The overhead lights flickered just slightly, as if reluctant to shine on what was about to unfold. Commander Evelyn Hart was brought in through the side entrance, wrists shackled, ankles cuffed. The chain between her legs clinked with each step. The bailiff, a former Marine himself, hesitated before announcing her name, perhaps out of respect, perhaps out of disbelief. She didn't blink as the room turned to stare. Even now, stripped of her uniform and dignity, she walked with the presence of someone who had stared down death in distant deserts and jungles. She was 38, though the gray near her temples made her seem older, not from age, but from the weight of what she'd seen. Her hair was pulled back into a regulation bun. Her face unreadable, her back straight. They'd taken her medals, her career, and even her voice, legally anyway, but they hadn't taken her dignity. That Evelyn had buried deeper than any secret file. In the third row of the gallery, 2 men sat in civilian clothes, backs ramrod straight. Jason Monroe, her former spotter and longtime teammate, clenched his jaw. Alex Reyes, the comms tech from their SEAL unit, kept his eyes trained on Evelyn like a guard dog off-leash. Neither had been invited. They'd found out about her arraignment through whispers in military circles. No one had dared speak publicly. Careers were at stake, maybe lives, but they'd flown across the country to be here. Reyes leaned slightly toward Monroe. "She hasn't said a word," he murmured. "She won't," Monroe replied, low and sure. "Not until she knows what game they're playing." Evelyn was led to the defendant's table, her chains rattling softly as she sat. Her court-appointed attorney, Brian Ellison, looked about 26, with a tie that didn't quite fit and eyes that hadn't yet learned to mask fear. He leaned in to whisper something, but Evelyn didn't respond. Her eyes were locked forward, her body still and precise, like a coiled spring. Ellison sat back, defeated already. "All rise," called the bailiff. The courtroom stood as Judge Lillian Myers entered. In her late 50s, she was known for her strict courtroom demeanor and near-legendary legal record. Her gavel struck once, firm, not showy. She took her seat and removed her glasses, letting her gaze sweep over the room like a security scan. Her eyes lingered a moment longer on Evelyn before dropping to the file in front of her. "We are here," she began crisply, "for the arraignment of Commander Evelyn Hart, United States Navy, on charges of breach of national security, unauthorized disclosure of classified materials, and," she paused slightly, "potential violations of the Espionage Act. Further charges are pending review." A murmur swept through the gallery, quickly silenced by a glare from the bailiff. From the prosecutor's table, Assistant U.S. Attorney Robert Harlan stood. Tall, in his early 60s, with steel-gray hair and a voice that had likely never cracked under pressure. Your Honor, Commander Hart has violated the core principles of national security. We are prepared to show she acted with full knowledge of the consequences. The government requests she be held without bail, given her access to classified systems, global contacts, and the ongoing threat she poses to sensitive operations. Judge Myers adjusted her glasses and turned to Evelyn. Commander Hart, how do you plead? Evelyn didn't move. She stared past the judge at some invisible point, unmoving. Commander, the judge said again, firmer, this court requires your plea. Again, nothing. Just the faint hum of the courtroom HVAC, the rustle of a reporter's notepad, and a tension so thick it pressed against the skin. Her attorney rose, fumbling. Your Honor, my client wishes to reserve her plea until I need to hear from the defendant. The judge cut him off sharply. Not from you. The silence stretched. The court reporter's fingers hovered above the keys, unsure whether to type something that wasn't happening. In the back row, DOJ agent Marla Jennings, 41, sat observing. One of the youngest ever promoted to the National Security Division, she had a reputation for solving problems that others swept under the rug. Her gaze was laser-focused on Evelyn. Not her silence, but everything else. The overuse of restraint, the rushed legal procedures, and the glaring absence of Navy command presence. Something smelled rotten. Jennings had seen her fair share of rushed arrests, but never one that reeked of fear like this. Her eyes flicked to the gallery doors as a man slipped in quietly. Late 60s, immaculate suit, military posture. Senator Nathaniel Cross, chairman of the Armed Services Committee. He didn't sit with staff. He sat alone, watching. Harlan moved again, his tone dripping with authority. The defendant has already violated trust at the highest level. Her silence now only reinforces her guilt. We intend to present evidence from Operation Frost Dagger, showing that Commander Hart disobeyed orders, compromised the mission, and placed American lives at risk. Reyes tensed. Monroe whispered, "That's a damn lie." "They're framing her," Reyes muttered back. "They're rewriting the op." Jennings turned slightly in her seat, pretending not to eavesdrop but catching every word. Judge Myers looked at Evelyn. Her voice softened just a hair. "Commander Hart, you've had an extraordinary service record. This court will not delay forever. I'm giving you one last opportunity." Then something happened. Something only those paying close attention noticed. A flicker in Evelyn's eyes. Not fear, not guilt, memory. For just a second she was back there, in the valley, the mountain air, the cold metal of her rifle against her shoulder, the voice of a child sobbing behind a cell door. The moment she opened that door and saw human test subjects, children, civilians, being used for something she still couldn't name. The explosion, the betrayal, the blood, the voice in her earpiece. Abort, repeat abort, fall back, leave them. She blinked once and the courtroom returned. Judge Myers's hand hovered over the contempt gavel. Then, without warning, the rear courtroom doors slammed open with a boom that echoed off the marble walls. Gasps rose from the gallery as Admiral Charles Dunham strode in, flanked by 2 military attorneys and a tall man in a dark suit, carrying a red-sealed folder. The room froze. Harlan's voice broke the silence. "This is highly irregular, Your Honor." Dunham stopped mid-aisle. His voice didn't rise, but it carried. "This proceeding is paused by direct order of the Office of the Secretary of Defense. I request an immediate in-chambers discussion with the court and counsel." Judge Myers raised an eyebrow but saw the look in Dunham's eyes. It wasn't bluster, it was gravity. She banged the gavel. "This court will recess for 30 minutes. The whispers exploded instantly. As the bailiffs ushered people out, Evelyn didn't move. Her eyes met Dunham's. No salute, no nod. Just a flicker of something, maybe trust, maybe warning. In the hallway, Agent Jennings slipped out and reached for her secure phone. She wasn't waiting for permission. She had files to pull and strings to tug. Back in the courtroom, alone now with her lawyer, Evelyn allowed herself one quiet moment to breathe. "Do you think this is the end?" Ellison asked, voice low. Evelyn looked up, her voice calm and steel-edged. "Number. It's the opening shot. The desert doesn't forget." That's what Evelyn Hart had always believed. Long before the courtroom, before the Medal of Honor that was never pinned, before the shackles and accusations, there had been that stretch of Afghan mountains under a sun so punishing it bleached bones and boiled memories. The day it all began was dry, windless, and impossibly still. Too still. Operation Frost Dagger had been sold to her team as a routine high-value surveillance mission. Low risk, high intel. Intel that had come directly from Admiral Charles Dunham himself. The objective was simple: observe an alleged terrorist compound, confirm the presence of known rogue actors, and extract if necessary. Standard rules of engagement. No civilian contact, no deviation from chain of command. But that wasn't what they found. Evelyn had crouched behind a jagged outcrop of limestone, her sniper rifle balanced against the ridge. Her breath was slow, controlled. She could feel every heartbeat through her trigger finger. Below, the compound appeared ordinary. Rundown structures, a few SUVs, armed guards posted lazily along the perimeter. But through the lens of her thermal scope, something wasn't right. Too many heat signatures. Inside one building, the eastern wing, partially collapsed from past shelling, there were bodies. Not combatants, not soldiers. Dozens of unmoving, clustered heat signatures packed together like cattle. "Team Bravo, status," she whispered into her comm. "North perimeter secure," came Monroe's voice. "Team Charlie, check in." "We're set on the west end," Reyes replied. "But something's weird down here. I'm seeing satellite interference. GPS ping is off." Evelyn toggled her satellite comlink and pinged back to command. No response. That was the first true red flag. Her spotter, Corporal Elise Wagner, tapped her shoulder. "Commander," she murmured, "you're going to want to see this." Elise passed her a secondary scope tablet connected to their drone. Evelyn zoomed in on the southern entrance of the compound. A convoy had just arrived. 3 unmarked black trucks. Men in civilian clothing exited, but their posture and precision gave them away instantly. Ex-military. One of them, tall, heavily built, with a prominent limp, stepped into the sun. Evelyn's heart sank. Colonel Martin Granger. Missing in action for 11 months. Presumed dead. Former lead on Joint CIANSA missions in the region. Except here he was, alive, and walking into what was supposed to be a Taliban stronghold. "Confirmed visual on primary," she said tightly. "Send facial ID to secure archive. Label, Frost Dagger Override Alpha." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Not from fear, but from what she knew this meant. This wasn't a terrorist compound. This was American. The deeper she dug, the worse it became. She repositioned herself down the ridge and moved silently toward a broken window where she could see inside the eastern building. It wasn't a barracks. It wasn't a war room. It was a holding facility. Inside were women, children, even elderly men. Some were shackled. Others lay on cots hooked to IV lines. The walls were covered in medical charts and vital screens, blood-stained sheets, metal tables, scorch marks. And in the corner, a refrigerated storage unit labeled property of OIS, Class Omega. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. "Commander," Elise whispered, "I've never seen anything like this. It's a black site." "No," Evelyn muttered, bile rising. "It's a lab." Back at the ridge, she gathered her team. "We're aborting observation protocol. New directive, humanitarian intervention. We extract now." "Commander, we weren't cleared to engage," Reyes pushed back. "This is off-book. No evac is in place. No backup." "I'm not leaving those people in there," she snapped. Her SEALs exchanged uncertain glances, not because they disagreed, but because they understood the cost. Disobeying a direct non-engagement order was career-ending, treason in the eyes of some, but they followed her anyway because she'd earned that loyalty, because what they saw wasn't war. It was murder disguised as science. They entered from the south under the cover of night. Team Charlie took the comms tower. Bravo blew the North Fuel Depot to create a diversion. Evelyn and Elise moved for the lab. Inside, it was worse than she'd feared. Piles of medical documents, burn folders with no names, just codes, photos of test subjects with progressive scarring, videos of forced injections, seizures, death. One screen showed bloodwork tagged with Project Specter. Not CIA, not DOD, something deeper, something dirtier. At the far end of the room, they found a locked chamber. They breached it. Inside, a girl, maybe 6 years old, hooked to tubes, unconscious. Beside her, a chart. Test batch C, viral exposure, time to onset trial. As Evelyn lifted the girl into her arms, the first mortar hit. Not from insurgents, from the air. "Missile inbound," Reyes shouted through the comm. Black Ridge Defense, an American private military contractor, had opened fire on the compound. Not to save them, to silence it. "Evac to Ridge Point Delta," Evelyn barked. "Get those civilians out." She ran through fire and blood, shielding the girl with her own body. Elise covered her, taking a bullet to the shoulder. Monroe grabbed 2 wounded civilians, dragging them through the smoke. Reyes disabled a Black Ridge drone with a hacked comm ping, nearly frying his own gear in the process. They lost 3 team members in that firefight. 37 civilians made it out. Barely. At the evac point, Evelyn handed the girl, now semi-conscious, to the corpsman. "What's her status?" she asked. "She's stable," he said, "but she needs care, fast." Evelyn looked down at the data drive strapped to her vest. She hadn't let it out of her sight. Everything she'd seen was stored there: audio, video, samples, signatures. She had the truth, and she knew what it would cost. When they returned to base, things changed instantly. No debrief, no promotion, no press. Instead, silence. Orders came to turn over the drive. Evelyn refused. Within a week, her team was split up. Reyes was sent to Guam. Monroe discharged early. Elise placed on indefinite medical leave. And Evelyn, she was reassigned to back-to-back high-risk missions. A slow bleed. She went quiet. She kept the drive. She waited. Then, the Medal of Honor nomination came. Too fast, too public. It wasn't a reward, it was a muzzle. Back in the present, Evelyn sat in the courtroom. The memories burned behind her eyes, sharper than any interrogation light. Harlan's voice droned on at the prosecution table. The judge scribbled notes. The bailiff yawned. No one in this room knew the girl's name, but Evelyn did. Her name was Farah. She was now in foster care in Canada under a false identity. Evelyn had arranged it herself. One of 17 survivors she'd personally tracked and relocated. They had new names, new lives. They were the real evidence. And Evelyn had stayed silent for 2 years to protect them. In the gallery, Agent Marla Jennings scanned Evelyn's face. That wasn't guilt, that was pain, that was memory. Jennings had seen that look before, in witnesses of war crimes, in veterans who couldn't sleep, in agents who knew too much and said too little. She slipped out of the courtroom and pulled out her phone. It was time to start digging. The official version of Operation Frost Dagger had too many redactions, too many gaps. And Evelyn Hart? She was not the villain. She was the last thread holding the truth together. Somewhere in D.C., in a dark paneled office, Senator Nathaniel Cross watched the coverage of Evelyn's arraignment on a muted screen. A man in a black suit entered the room. No name, no insignia. "Is she going to talk?" the man asked. "She doesn't need to," the senator replied. "People like her. They act. They inspire others. We need to cut the fuse before it lights." "What about the survivors?" "We're watching them," Cross said coldly. "They so much as whisper the wrong thing. We deal with it." He sipped his scotch. "The drive?" the man asked. Cross smiled. "Let's pray she's sentimental enough to keep it." But Evelyn wasn't sentimental, she was strategic, and she hadn't just kept the drive. She'd made copies, one of which was in the hands of someone who owed her their life, and who had no intention of letting it stay buried. The courtroom was silent when the doors closed again. Not the respectful kind of silence that came before justice was delivered, but the uncertain hush of a room holding its breath, waiting for someone to break first. Commander Evelyn Hart sat unmoving, her wrists still chained, her ankles bound to the steel loop embedded in the floor beneath the defense table. She hadn't said a word since the proceedings began, and that silence now loomed larger than any testimony. Her face bore the same hardened calm of someone trained to wait in sniper's stillness for hours, sometimes days, before pulling the trigger. It wasn't defiance, it was control. And control was all she had left. Opposite her, Assistant U.S. Attorney Robert Harlan organized his folders like a man preparing for a chess match against a ghost. His confidence had faltered after Admiral Dunham's dramatic entry and the judge's unexpected recess. Still, he looked sure that time was on his side. Bureaucracies favored inertia. Silence benefited the accuser. Judge Lillian Myers returned to the bench, her posture straighter than before, but her face noticeably drawn. Whatever Dunham had whispered to her during their chamber meeting had shaken something loose, something that wasn't part of the government's script. "Proceed," she said curtly, glancing toward the prosecution. Harlan rose, his voice smooth and steady again. "Your Honor, we ask the court to consider new classified footage obtained from Commander Hart's secured locker. The evidence supports our assertion that she acted in direct violation of operational orders, endangering lives and compromising national security." He signaled the tech clerk. Lights dimmed. A projection screen descended from the ceiling. The video that began to play was cleanly edited, tight, and tailored for maximum damage. It showed Evelyn giving unauthorized commands, breaching the compound in Afghanistan, and what appeared to be a confrontation with her teammate, Petty Officer Reese Dalton. To the untrained eye, it looked damning. Evelyn's voice, cold and clipped. Her orders, sharp. The explosion at the end, chaotic, fiery, fatal. "She led an unsanctioned raid," Harlan announced as the lights returned. "She altered mission parameters, defied orders from Naval Command, and ultimately caused a diplomatic incident involving a NATO partner. The government has every right to detain her without bail under the Espionage Act." There was a long pause. Then Judge Myers turned to Evelyn. "Commander Hart," she said firmly, "the evidence presented is compelling. However, we are not in a military tribunal. This is a civilian court. You are entitled to speak. You may offer a plea, or a defense, or simply the truth." Still, Evelyn didn't move. She stared forward, breathing slow and deliberate. Her silence screamed louder than any confession. Her court-appointed lawyer, young Brian Ellison, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Your Honor, the defense maintains that my client is exercising her right to remain silent." "No," the judge interrupted, her voice now tinged with rising frustration. "I don't need legal posturing. I need to hear from the woman this entire nation is talking about. The decorated soldier, the accused traitor. I want to hear her voice." Ellison looked helplessly at Evelyn. "Commander, please." Nothing. In the back of the courtroom, Agent Marla Jennings watched closely, arms crossed, fingers tapping a slow rhythm against her hip. She had made 6 calls since the recess, including one to a contact deep in the Naval Intelligence Office. The documents she received in response now rested in a slim folder beneath her coat. She hadn't yet decided what to do with them. Next to her, Jason Monroe leaned over to Alex Reyes. "That footage was chopped," he whispered. Dalton drew first. She disarmed him. "That's not what happened." Reyes nodded grimly. "They're building their story. They're betting she stays quiet." Jennings' jaw tightened. Because they were right. Up at the defense table, Evelyn finally blinked. Her jaw clenched, and her shoulders rose, almost imperceptibly. There was a storm behind her eyes, a war raging beneath the surface, invisible to the courtroom but raging nonetheless. She could speak now. She could tell them everything. The lab, the prisoners, the girl named Farah. The missiles that fell not from enemies but from American contractors paid to bury secrets. She could unmask names like Senator Nathaniel Cross and expose the human experiments tagged Project Specter. But the cost would be unbearable. If she spoke, the 17 survivors she had hidden across 3 countries would become targets again. The system wasn't built to protect people like them, or her. The moment she opened her mouth, someone would make a phone call, and the first accident would follow. A fire, a robbery gone wrong, a van that disappeared off a rural highway. She'd seen it before. She remembered what Admiral Dunham had told her just before the courtroom recessed. "We're not the only ones listening. If you speak, you better be ready to burn down the whole tree, not just shake a few branches." So she sat still. Her silence wasn't cowardice. It was sacrifice. Then, just as Judge Myers reached for her gavel to rule Evelyn in contempt, the side door opened. A familiar face entered, Petty Officer Reese Dalton, now in custody, wrists cuffed, flanked by 2 MPs. Gasps echoed through the gallery. "The government calls Petty Officer Dalton as a rebuttal witness," Harlan announced, with what could only be described as a smirk. Dalton took the stand. He looked rough, unshaven, pale, thinner than Evelyn remembered. But he still carried the arrogance of a man used to power. "Petty Officer," Harlan began, "did Commander Hart violate orders during Operation Frost Dagger?" Dalton nodded. "She did." "Did she confront you when you attempted to follow original engagement rules?" "She attacked me," he said, cool and flat. Gasps again. Harlan nodded, as if expecting it. "And did she destroy sensitive materials at the compound?" "I can't confirm that," Dalton replied, "but I believe it's likely." Then a voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. "Why did you do it?" It was Evelyn, her first words since entering the courtroom. Every head turned. Even Judge Myers sat back, stunned. Evelyn stared directly at Dalton. Her voice was low but clear. "Why did you betray your oath? Why did you turn on your team?" Judge Myers opened her mouth to interject, but stopped. She wanted the answer, too. Dalton shifted. He glanced at Harlan, who nodded slightly. But something cracked in Dalton then. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was self-preservation, maybe both. "My sister," he said, "her husband, their kids, they live in Karachi. A man came to me 2 months before the mission, said if I didn't help, they'd disappear." "You could have come to me," Evelyn said, her voice suddenly full of both pain and steel. "I would have protected them." "I didn't trust anyone," he replied. "They said Admiral Dunham was in on it. Said the order to stand down came from him." Evelyn's gaze faltered just a fraction. "You saw the prisoners," she said. Dalton nodded. "I saw. And you called in the strike anyway," his voice broke. "Yes." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Dalton hung his head. "I have to live with that, every day." When he was led out of the courtroom, the spell finally broke. Harlan stood, voice frantic now. "Your Honor, I move that the previous testimony be stricken from the record. The defense coerced a witness in full view of the court." "Sit down, Mr. Harlan," Judge Myers said sharply. She looked at Evelyn. "You still haven't entered a plea," she said, her tone softer now. "But I think the court, and the country, deserve to hear what really happened." Evelyn took a breath, and then she stood. For the first time, with every eye on her, she spoke with the calm fury of a soldier who had seen too much and carried it too long. "I swore to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I followed orders until those orders meant letting children die. I protected the survivors because no one else would. And I stayed silent because I knew the truth wouldn't just destroy careers, it would get people killed." She paused. "But I see now, silence is no longer protection, it's permission." She looked directly at Judge Myers. "I plead not guilty, and I request a classified session to present evidence of a government-led bioweapons program using civilians as test subjects." Dead silence. Then chaos. Harlan erupted. The judge struck her gavel, but it was too late. The war of conscience had begun, and Evelyn had just fired the first shot. The storm broke not with thunder, but with a single name whispered into a secure line. Hart. It was Agent Marla Jennings, tucked inside a soundproof briefing room at DOJ headquarters in downtown Washington, her coat still damp from the freezing rain outside. The room was bare, except for a metal table, 2 chairs, and a secured laptop glowing with the Pentagon's classified interface. She had bypassed the official request chain and instead called in a favor from an old friend at the Naval Archives. "Anything unofficial ever cross your desk about Operation Frost Dagger?" she'd asked. There had been a long pause, then a number, then a file. She opened it now, eyes scanning faster than she had in years. Her heart slowed, then stopped, then burned. What she read confirmed what her instincts had been screaming since Evelyn Hart's arrest. This wasn't about treason. This wasn't about national security. This was about covering up a crime. A crime carried out by Americans against civilians, funded by black budgets and buried so deep it made Watergate look like a paperwork mistake. Marla stood and moved for the door. Time was no longer on their side. There was a crack in the wall, and she intended to break it wide open. Back in the federal courthouse, Judge Myers recessed the court following Evelyn's explosive declaration. But whispers had turned to roars. Word was already leaking to the press. Rumors buzzed through legal circles. The term bioweapons program hadn't been spoken aloud in open court, but it was there, in every eyebrow raised, every reporter's frantically typed headline, every Pentagon staffer who suddenly couldn't meet anyone's eyes. As the gallery emptied, Evelyn remained seated, her hands no longer in cuffs, but still clenched. That one sentence, Silence is no longer protection, it's permission. Had changed everything. She had breached the unspoken code of obedience, and once breached, it could not be resealed. Admiral Dunham approached the defense table, flanked by 2 Navy JAG officers. His face was stone. "You realize what you've done?" he asked quietly. "I do," Evelyn said, meeting his eyes. "But you brought me here for a reason, Admiral. I wasn't just bait." "No," Dunham admitted. "You were the lit match." 2 hours later, in a private debriefing room within the courthouse, Evelyn sat opposite Marla Jennings. Between them lay a drive. Small, black, unassuming. But inside it was everything. "Where did you get this?" Evelyn asked. "My contact decrypted fragments from the Operation Frost Dagger archive. We had to cross-reference it with budget audits, drone logs, and SATCOM records. Half of it's still redacted beyond readability, but what we do have?" Jennings looked Evelyn square in the eyes. "It matches your testimony." Evelyn exhaled slowly. "Where's the rest?" "I'm working on it," Marla replied. "But there's a bigger issue. Some of the data points to a secondary program, one I hadn't seen referenced before, called Glasshouse Protocol. Ever heard of it?" Evelyn nodded once. "Only in whispers, a last resort failsafe, total asset elimination. People, witnesses, evidence, everything," Marla said grimly. "That protocol was triggered yesterday. Someone's moving fast." They didn't have to wait long to see it in action. That night, Reese Dalton, who had just confessed to betraying the mission under duress, was found unconscious in his holding cell. He had fallen, according to the guards, but the trauma to his skull suggested something else. He survived, but barely. And his lawyer? Gone. Vanished. His phone disconnected, his apartment cleaned out. Officially, on vacation. The next morning, Alex Reyes was nearly run off the road by a black SUV with no plates. It sped away before police arrived. Jason Monroe was sent a package at his hotel, a bullet. No note. Just a single .308 round, the same caliber used by Navy SEAL snipers. The message was clear. Stand down or disappear. But the wall was already cracking, and others were ready to come forward. One by one, Evelyn's former teammates began speaking up, first to Marla in secret interviews, then to congressional staffers. They shared encrypted footage, after-action notes, even satellite timestamps that contradicted the government's official version of events. Each new voice made it harder for the administration to deny what was coming. Then came the tipping point. In a quiet cafe in Bethesda, Maryland, Marla met with Dr. Julian Corwin, a civilian bioethicist who had been contracted by the Department of Defense to review anonymous medical test data during the time of Frost Dagger. "They told me it was from a captured foreign lab," he explained, sipping coffee with shaking hands. "They said it was intel analysis only. I reviewed the metadata. It didn't add up. American timestamps, U.S. blood type indexing systems, Western medical codes. You flagged it?" Marla asked. "I sent a report. It disappeared. Then I was pulled from the contract." "What did you see, Doctor?" He hesitated. "Children," he said at last. "Dozens. Blood work, neuroscans, respiratory damage. They were testing weaponized viruses on kids. Not all of them Afghan, some European, some American." Marla leaned in. "Would you testify?" Dr. Corwin looked at her as if she'd asked him to walk into fire. "I don't know," he said, "but I'll give you what I have." The next afternoon, Judge Myers called an emergency session, citing newly received evidence of extreme relevance. The courtroom was closed to the public. As the lights dimmed and the screen flickered to life, the silence was complete. The footage played raw, unedited. Body cam videos from Evelyn's team, audio transmissions, satellite overlays, medical scans, images of cell doors being kicked open, children crying, Evelyn carrying Farah in her arms, blood on her sleeve, Dalton, before he turned, calling for extraction, and then the missile strike from an American drone, unmarked. The screen went black. No one spoke. Judge Myers removed her glasses. Her voice was hoarse. "We will take a recess effective immediately." She left the bench without waiting for response, but outside the walls of the courtroom the storm was building. News outlets had caught wind of the drama. Whispers became headlines. SEAL hero silenced for speaking truth? Bioweapons scandal? DOJ tight-lipped? Is Evelyn Hart a whistleblower or a traitor? Public sentiment, once uncertain, began to shift. Veterans groups rallied to Evelyn's defense. SEAL alumni penned open letters. Former military lawyers demanded a halt to the trial. Across social media, hashtags spread like wildfire. Number, Justice for Hart, number Project, Specter number Unseal the Truth. That night, in a secure room beneath the Capitol, Admiral Dunham met with Senator Benjamin Kearns, ranking member of the Intelligence Oversight Committee. "She's telling the truth," Dunham said bluntly, placing the drive on the table. "And you need to act before they bury her for good. You're asking us to go to war with our own defense contractors," Kearns replied. "I'm asking you to stop pretending you don't already know what they've done," Dunham countered. Kearns leaned back. "I'll call a hearing," he said. "Classified. No press. You bring her. You bring the files." "No," Dunham said. "We go public. The people deserve to see what's been done in their name." Kearns considered it, then reluctantly nodded. "You'll have your hearing." In a quiet corner of a nondescript hospital, Evelyn sat beside Reese Dalton's bed. He was conscious but weak. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "You should be," she said. I never thought they'd go that far." "They always do," she replied. "You just didn't see it until it was too late." Reese turned his head. "Are you going to finish it?" Evelyn's jaw clenched. "I didn't start this war," she said, "but I'll end it." The wall was broken now. Light poured in, and what that light revealed was darker than anyone had imagined. But Evelyn Hart, former sniper, reluctant symbol, wounded warrior, was done hiding. She wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. She was fighting for every name the system had tried to erase. And this time, she wasn't alone. The truth doesn't ask permission. It doesn't knock gently. It kicks down doors and forces its way into rooms where silence has ruled for too long. By the time Evelyn Hart walked into the Senate hearing room on a wind-lashed morning in late February, she was no longer the woman America had seen in shackles, no longer the ghost of scandal, nor the accused traitor. She walked in wearing her service dress blues, no shackles this time, her ribbons restored, her spine unbent. Her face bore lines deeper than her 38 years suggested, but her eyes, those sharpshooter's eyes, were lit with something no courtroom had managed to shake loose: defiance, purpose, and fire. The chamber was packed. Press badges hung like war medals from every collar. The air shimmered with anticipation. Outside, crowds gathered, waving flags, signs, and cell phones. Some shouted her name, others darker things. But here, in this room carved from the bones of old democracy, the war had shifted. Behind her sat Admiral Dunham, flanked by her former SEALs, Jason Monroe and Alex Reyes among them. Farther back, Agent Marla Jennings took notes with a pen, not a laptop. A quiet act of resistance in a digital age where every keystroke could be tracked. At the dais, Senator Benjamin Kearns, silver-haired and slow-spoken, the kind of man who once wore West Point gray and still polished his shoes before a hearing. He tapped the mic. This committee is now in session to investigate claims of illegal human experimentation, classified cover-ups, and the alleged operation known as Project Specter. We welcome Commander Evelyn Hart, United States Navy, to provide sworn testimony. Evelyn stood. The room went still. Her right hand rose. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. And then she told it. All of it. For nearly 3 hours, Evelyn detailed the events of Operation Frost Dagger, the satellite anomalies, the intercepted drone logs, the compound that wasn't enemy-held but American-run. She spoke of children behind locked doors, blood tests, strange vials. She described the strike ordered not by insurgents, but by private contractors working under classified clearance. She named names, dates, budget codes, things that couldn't be faked. When she got to the girl, Farah, the 6-year-old survivor she'd carried through gunfire, her voice cracked for the first time. She didn't cry when I picked her up, Evelyn said softly. She didn't scream. She just looked at me, like she'd already seen what death looked like and decided she'd rather not speak to it again. Senator Kearns shifted in his seat. "Why did you wait to tell this story?" he asked. Evelyn didn't blink. "Because truth without protection is a death sentence. Not just for me, for them, for the survivors. I had to move them, secure them, wait until the right people were watching. And now they are." Evelyn met his eyes. "They are." Outside the chamber, the world had shifted. Jada Simmons, a 26-year-old freelance journalist who had been live-streaming Evelyn's courthouse hearing since day one, watched the Senate stream on her phone with tears in her eyes. Her audience had ballooned from a few thousand to over 1.8 million live viewers across platforms. She hit record on a new stream. "You're watching history." They tried to bury her. They tried to make her disappear. But Evelyn Hart didn't vanish. She fought back. Her video would later be clipped, subtitled in 20 languages, and played in classrooms, boardrooms, and even the floor of the United Nations. But power doesn't die quietly. Back at DOJ headquarters, panic spread. Harlan, the lead prosecutor from Evelyn's arraignment, had vanished. No resignation letter, no exit paperwork. His office wiped, his home empty. A single phone found on his desk displayed one message on a locked screen. "We clean our own messes." The phrase was familiar. Too familiar. The Glasshouse Protocol. Marla Jennings recognized it instantly. It was the Shadow Playbook, the method used when a scandal couldn't be controlled, when people became liabilities. The first sign was subtle. Dr. Julian Corwin, the whistleblower bioethicist, missed his scheduled congressional briefing. Then came Sarah Lynn, a junior intel analyst who had flagged irregularities in Blackridge's payment logs, found dead in an apartment fire labeled electrical malfunction. It wasn't a cleanup, it was a purge. And Evelyn knew exactly who was next. She didn't run. She went straight to Kearns. "They're triggering protocol," she told him bluntly. "You open those sealed records now, or there won't be anything left to find." Kearns stared at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the phone and dialed the Speaker of the House. By midnight, a special counsel was appointed. By 3 a.m., an emergency injunction froze all Project Specter funds. By sunrise, Blackridge defense stock had plummeted 48%. The wall wasn't just cracked now, it was caving in. And still, the fight came. The morning Evelyn was set to testify before a joint oversight panel, she was followed. The SUV was black, unmarked, and fast. Monroe spotted it first. They didn't wait. Monroe cut across 2 lanes of DC traffic, running red lights as Evelyn shouted coordinates to Reyes on a burner phone. At Constitution Avenue, the SUV rammed them from the rear. Evelyn's side airbag deployed, then failed. She hit the passenger door with a grunt, rolled, and drew the Glock stashed in the glove box. Monroe was already moving. Reyes cut off the pursuit vehicle from the side with his own car, forcing it onto the curb. It slammed into a light pole, then smoked. By the time they pulled open the driver's door, it was empty. No driver, just a timed ignition rig. It hadn't been a hit, it had been a warning. Back off, or next time, it's not smoke you'll smell, it's blood. They didn't back off. Instead, Evelyn doubled down. She went live. A national interview with Cora Shepard, the 70-year-old legend of investigative broadcast journalism, who had come out of semi-retirement for one story only. Live, in front of the world, Evelyn sat with her medals in a small velvet box beside her, not pinned to her chest, but resting like evidence. "I wore the uniform," she said. "I obeyed orders. I served this country with everything I had. But I will not let a flag be used to cover up a crime. Patriotism isn't silence, it's courage." She opened the box. Inside, the Navy Cross, the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, and the citation for the Medal of Honor, never formally awarded. "I don't need their medals," she said. "I need justice." The interview would be rebroadcast 12 times. It would be played on every cable network, every smartphone feed. Overnight, Evelyn Hart became not just a soldier but a symbol. And the truth, it kept fighting back. At 6:17 a.m. on the following Monday, a full list of Project Specter contractors leaked online, complete with names, dates, payments, and operation summaries. No one claimed responsibility, but the metadata traced back to a signal first triangulated from Norway, near the hiding place of survivor Farah. Someone was watching, someone was protecting her too. By week's end, Black Ridge's CEO resigned. A classified Navy medical unit was disbanded. 4 generals were subpoenaed, and the president announced a full independent investigation. In the halls of the Capitol, where Evelyn had once been walked in handcuffs, she now walked freely. Not alone, but surrounded. Behind her, survivors, whistleblowers, advocates, journalists. Ahead of her, the future. One carved not in silence but in testimony, not in medals but in memory, and always, always, with the echo of a truth too heavy to stay buried. Evelyn Hart had become the storm the system couldn't contain, and still she stood. They didn't give Evelyn Hart her Medal of Honor, not formally. Not with brass bands or televised ceremonies or scripted applause echoing off Capitol marble. No, the honor she received came not from the hands of presidents or admirals, but from the people who had watched her fight a system built to erase her. It came from the mothers who tucked their children in at night, knowing now that someone had once carried a 6-year-old through gunfire instead of leaving her behind. It came from the whistleblowers who stepped out of the shadows, inspired by a woman who had risked everything not for glory, but for truth. And it came from survivors, those 17 souls Evelyn had hidden, protected, and in some cases quite literally rescued. Farah was now enrolled in school, her medical records wiped clean of her past. One boy in Spain, once used for early viral testing, had just learned to walk again. Another young woman, now 20, had enrolled in nursing school to help people the way I wish someone had helped me sooner. Evelyn didn't seek their thanks. She didn't need it. But she carried their stories in a locket pressed close to her chest. A small silver disc engraved with nothing but a single word. Remember. The aftermath was brutal and necessary. Congress launched the Specter inquiry, a multi-branch investigation that spanned 2 years, revealed over $4.6 billion in unaccounted black funds, and implicated no fewer than 12 senior defense officials, including 2 sitting senators. The private security firm Black Ridge Defense was dissolved. Its top executives were indicted. 3 pleaded guilty. 1 fled the country. His assets were seized and redistributed to a newly established survivor compensation fund, a fund created thanks to public pressure and Evelyn's relentless advocacy. But Evelyn didn't stop there. She co-founded the Glasslight Initiative, a nonprofit watchdog group that monitors covert defense spending and whistleblower protections. She refused a book deal. She declined the biopic rights. Instead, she built something quieter, stronger, enduring. The initiative's mission? Expose what they bury, protect those who speak. Within 5 months, it had helped over 70 whistleblowers in 5 different countries. She never returned to active duty. The Navy offered a full reinstatement, a promotion, a desk job at the Pentagon. She said no. "I serve the people now," she told a reporter, "not the machine." And yet, even with the trials, the investigations, the headlines, the reforms, there was one moment that said more than all the rest. It came quietly, no cameras, no microphones. Evelyn was sitting at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in D.C., her coat collar turned up against the cold. A man in his late 70s approached. He wore a cap that read, "First Air Cavalry, Vietnam." He didn't say much, just sat beside her, pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat and placed it gently on the stone. "My brother," he said, nodding toward the wall. "He believed in this country the way you do." Evelyn didn't answer. She didn't have to, because they both understood something deeper than words. That loyalty to a nation means holding it accountable when it loses its way, not blindly serving power, but serving principle. The man stood, then paused. "Thank you," he said quietly. Evelyn looked up. Her voice was firm, but gentle. "Tell his story," she said. "Don't let them forget." And so that became her mission. Not justice for herself, but justice for all the voices history had tried to silence. She testified in more hearings, consulted on legislation, advocated for veterans abandoned by the very institutions they served. In time, schools began to teach her case, not as scandal, but as courage. The military launched what they now call the Hart Reforms, which included a permanent inspector general for black budget operations, mandatory whistleblower protections under military law, a ban on third-party experimentation in conflict zones, and a memorial for victims of unauthorized testing operations. That memorial stands today in Arlington Cemetery, tucked near Section 60, where so many of the fallen from Iraq and Afghanistan now rest. It bears no names, only a simple inscription. "To those who were never meant to be remembered, we remember you now." Evelyn visits once a year. She brings no flowers, only silence, because silence, when chosen, can be sacred. Her final public address came 5 years after the trial. Standing before a crowd of 10,000 in Lincoln Park, she spoke without a teleprompter. "I was trained to fight with precision, with strategy, with fire," she said. "But the hardest fight I ever faced wasn't in a desert. It was here, in the heart of the country I loved." She paused. "They wanted me silent. They called me disloyal. They called me dangerous. But here's the truth. Truth is always dangerous to those who fear it." A pause. Then, "I didn't burn the flag. I just refused to let it be used to hide a crime." The crowd rose. In that moment, Evelyn Hart didn't just reclaim her name. She reclaimed the meaning of patriotism and gave it back to a country still struggling to understand what loyalty really means. Evelyn Hart's journey reminds us that silence can protect, but it can also betray. What would you do if the truth you carried could cost everything, yet save lives? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you won't miss future stories that shine light on hidden truths, real heroes, and the powerful impact of standing up for what's right. Your voice matters. Join the conversation and be part of the movement.